When I started woodworking, I thought that I know everything I need to know. But then I kept running into problems that I didn't even know existed until they ruined my projects. And so, today I will share 5 things that I learned the hard way, so that you don't have to. And yeah, number 5, it still trips me sometimes. Imagine, you just got a beautiful new tool. You set it up, you make sure it's straight, you make your cut, and then, oh, how can this be? You did everything right. Well, one of the things that you learn sooner or later is that new tools are not properly calibrated. And sadly, you have to do that yourself. But what does that actually mean? And it kind of depends on the tool. But for example, on this miter saw, it's making sure that your blade is set up perfectly on 90 degrees angle horizontally and vertically. Because if they're not, and you put 2 pieces together after cutting, they will not fit too well. And so, just before making a cut, get a small speed square or a normal square or any other tool that you have and make sure that it's straight before making a cut. And this is especially the case with cheaper tools, as the vibration and general use decalibrates these things much quicker. So for example, this thing, it decalibrates much quicker than that table saw which is made by DeWalt, simply because it's a much cheaper tool. And I promise you, that quick check will save you a lot of frustration and annoyance. Okay. I'm sure that we've all had this experience. You happily drill your screws and then suddenly, shit. Yeah, we've all been there. The wood splits, it looks awful, and you regret waking up today. But luckily, there are 2 main reasons as to why this is happening, and it's very easy to avoid. You see, when you add a screw very close to the edge of the board, what is happening is that the top of the screw pretty much prays out the wood in opposite direction, splitting it in the process. And you can avoid this by putting a countersink and a pilot hole where you want your screw. And by the way, you should put a countersink first and then your hole, not the other way around. But long story short, it effectively ensures that your screw has enough space to go into the wood without having to pry it open to do that. But it can still happen when you do this. Over-tightening is something that's actually quite surprisingly easy to do. You look away for a second, and oh, it no longer holds. And usually, there is a very simple way to avoid this. If you're using a hand drill, there is a clutch there that will actually limit your torque at some point. It's not very accurate, but it is quite repeatable. Mine, for example, it goes up to 10. And I know that when I have the 10 selected here, it will not be able to go through the wood, but the joint will still be quite strong. And I'm sure that you can figure out the same on your hand drill. You're pretty smart. Sanding. Woodworker's favorite task. And it is a thing that I always used to rush. I'd hit it with an 80 grit on this thing and just call it a day. And then I would happily apply finish and realize that I now permanently sealed swear marks and scratches and any other imperfections into my beautiful piece of wood. Great. Just what I needed. I guess you could call it character, but I won't. Sadly, sanding is quite important. It is a pain in the ass, but it needs to be done properly. If you're using an orbital sander, make sure you don't skip grits. So start with a 60, move to an 80, 120 and then 180. And that way you will get your surface looking really nice and smooth. And when you're using one of these, I know it's super tempting, but don't push it down. Let the tool do the work. Really, you should just be guiding it. Now, what I tend to do as well is to finish sanding by hand, specifically moving with the grain, and you can really feel the difference when doing it. Also, what I recommend is to protect your piece in some way, so that you don't have to redo it in 6 months. Unprotected wood will very quickly gather scratches, moisture marks and a lot of other things. And you have so many choices in terms of what you can use. Waxes, stains, oils, lacquers, there's just so many of them. What you actually use, however, really will depend on how well you want to protect it and how you want it to look like afterwards. But whatever it may be, you gotta protect your wood. Come on, you should know that. And now, number 2 is something that I've paid for already, and I am pretty certain that I will pay for in the future. But wood, it moves. It expands and contracts over time, especially considering the moisture and general environment. And one way to be absolutely certain that whatever you're making will break or bend over time is to ignore that fact, especially when you're making tabletops or anything that uses really long pieces of wood. Always plan for movement and try to avoid fully constraining wide boards and long pieces of wood. Give your wood room to breathe and move. You can do that by using slotted screw holes or using nails instead of screws on long boards, and various other tricks that you can actually learn online. But critically, you have to learn how wood moves. And sadly, to make it more complicated, all of them move at different rates. However, luckily for beginners, pine and other softwoods, they don't really move that much and are quite forgiving. Wait a minute. That doesn't look right. Sadly, most lumber bought from the stores is warped, cupped or twisted to some degree. It's pretty normal. But if you expect perfection, you will be disappointed. Especially when you find it out after you cut everything and you're trying to assemble it. I've also been there. And you might hear from more experienced woodworker, just get a planer and a jointer, which is great advice. I'll just go ahead and whip out thousands of dollars of equipment to do this. Yeah, it's not gonna happen, is it? But here is my a little bit more realistic approach. You have to learn to live with and work around imperfections. You have to accept that all of your pieces are slightly wonky. And you will have to do a lot of magic to make them look good. For example, if your wood is slightly bowing, you will have to sand it off after assembly and strategically place it in a place where it will not be that visible. You can of course do a lot of other things. I've actually learned this little neat trick recently. If you need to join two boards on their side and they're not aligned perfectly, and let's face it, they won't be, you can actually use your table saw or a track saw to align them perfectly. And pretty much what you have to do is to join them and make a cut precisely where they're meeting. Then get them closer and repeat the same thing until they are perfectly aligned. In fairness, it is a little bit time consuming, but it's a lot cheaper than getting a jointer. Now, these 5 things, they may have seemed small, but every single one of them cost me time, wasted material, and honestly made me question whenever I was actually getting better. And as always, for all equipment used in this video, you can find the links in the description below. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but I get a tiny percentage of that sale, which supports this channel. But what's something that you learned the hard way? Drop it in the comments below. I will read every single one of them.